The next call is a split call. Jenny Salisa, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for this opportunity to speak on the Social Housing Reform Bill. Mr Speaker, today is a sad day to be debating this bill in this House. Mr Speaker, Michael Joseph Savage in the 1930s, a former Labour Prime Minister, has the legacy of building state houses to house vulnerable families. He stated, Mr Speaker, that the government has a collective responsibility to care for each other. All of us here in the House of Representatives, we have a collective responsibility to care for each other and for our constituents. While the Social Housing Reform Bill is the total opposite of a caring piece of legislation, Mr Speaker. I've heard a few members, particularly from the other side of the House, stating that this bill is about serving families, that it is about serving families better. Mr Speaker, how in the world is it possible that we would be serving families better by selling the houses that they live in from under them, by evicting them from the houses that they live in right now? We have a housing crisis in Auckland already, Mr Speaker. Almost every day I see this with my own eyes, with families when they come through my office, families who come in minivans and that is the home that they live in, families who live in garages, families who live with 2, sometimes 3 families sharing a house because that is the only way that they can make ends meet. Families who cannot afford a house over their own heads by themselves, Mr Speaker. I would like to state, Mr Speaker, that unfortunately there is not much in Budget 2015, including the Social Housing Reform Bill, to relieve the 7 long, very long, hard and painful years that have been suffered by the people in my electorate at Manukau East and South Auckland, people in Otara, Otahuhu, Papatoetoe, and alongside thousands of ordinary Kiwis across New Zealand. Mr Speaker, housing and decent jobs are major issues for my constituents in Manukau East. Housing and employment are basic building blocks for a decent life, Mr Speaker. Having the ability to work, being able to afford a roof over your family's head, and being able to afford to buy food for your children and your family. Nothing fancy, Mr Speaker, just the basic necessities of life. These basic necessities continue to be increasingly difficult for working families to maintain. This in spite of many years of tantalising promises that we're on the cusp of something special and that we should just wait a little while longer, that there will be more jobs, that there will be increased incomes, and there was also the promise of affordable housing by this budget. Somehow, affordable housing we will hope to see in the very unknown future, who knows? Mr Speaker, there's undeniably a major housing crisis in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This government has failed to confront the housing crisis head on. They have been content with tutuing around the edges. In last year's budget, National promised that housing would be made more affordable, but it's plain for all to see, Mr Speaker, housing is not more affordable today. Housing is, in actual fact, much more expensive each and every day. Housing in Auckland, $809,000 for an average house. That is most definitely not affordable. Now, the very first piece of legislation this government is ramming through the House is to hold a fire sale of state houses for their developer mates. Mr Speaker, this social housing reform bill is not compassionate conservatism, as we heard yesterday. It is cabinet club conservatism, flicking off the state houses to developer mates at knockdown prices. It is not lies. Mr Speaker, this government's special housing areas in Auckland, what is touted to actually relieve Auckland, 170 houses have been built in a year and a half, Mr Speaker. 170 houses. Under National, the shortfall has not been addressed. This government has failed to ensure that housing is affordable, as they promised. This government has failed to provide housing, a basic human right for people, Mr Speaker. I and the Labour Party strongly oppose this bill, Mr Speaker.
For Micafai Chair.